My name is Alicia Roberts Novak, and I'm the host of the Generation X Studio. We felt that, this would be a good way for us to kind of talk about an era that seems to be kind of forgotten, right?
Welcome to the Gen X Studio, where members of Generation X come onto the show to tell their stories. Our goal is to document not only the experiences of growing up Generation X, but also share our perspectives with future generations, in the hope that they can learn about the past and use that knowledge to help build a better future. Join us and find out what makes Generation X great. Let's go! On today's episode of Gen X Studio, Andre Kellum Sr. talks about his journey becoming a business owner and also provides advice for young entrepreneurs.
So I'm very thankful about the time that I grew up because it molded me into who I am today. It molded in the influences and all the things. Being a part of that generation that went from, bricks and mortar to technology to now the cloud. Having all of those references allows me to think differently and have more exposure to so many different things that it really is, beneficial to how I operate in business, how I operate in life, how I see things, how I operate with colleagues and loved ones, but most importantly, how I am able to continue to work with the population and the masses. And so it allows me to develop new things, be creative outside of my own space, to establish relationships, to grow. And it doesn't limit me. And so what I would encourage the next generation to do is, leave that open availability of creativity, because that is what my generation experienced. And I think your generation can experience even more because you have the best of all history has given you. And so use that to advance yourself forward. And so growing up, seeing where everything has come from and where it has gone has been like a great, privilege, because we are the bridge between the generation before us, the boomer generation, and now the generations that are after. And watching now my children with technology and doing coding and things like that, and inner workings of the very things that we, basically birthed, is a blessing to be a part of that generation. I had older parents. I was the youngest child of my family, me and my sister, and so it was funny when I went away to college. I remember buying a VCR, and I remember my dad calling me in school asking me to set the VCR time when I came back home from break, and I'm like, it's a manual like sitting right there, and this is a man who knew how to break down automobile engines and repair cars and drive trucks and 18 wheelers, and he couldn't set a VCR clock. So it was like, just embracing technology is still something that eludes them, even to a point now where I'll get a phone call at my age now, and it'll be my dad or my mom saying that I had to call your sister over to reset our cable because the cable remote isn't working. And it was because they had turned the TV to a different channel. And so, just they really did struggle with technology. But we totally embraced it, and even so now that I even have to look at some of the things with my children and how they're trying to get me to do more surfing and more streaming and more things like that. I remember going from 8 tracks to tape cassettes to from albums to now CDs and then DVDs and to now streaming, and I still have cassette tapes and albums and a record player and things like that. So because it helps my kids understand where this originated from. I remember, in high school being introduced, going from typewriters to word processors, and then getting to college and going from word processors to computers. And so I remember the big clunky machines and how we used to hear the sound of the internet when it would make that sound, and the AOL connection when or you got mail. So I remember, going through that. And, if you've never been in a college library trying to do a paper at midnight and waiting on an internet connection to connect, for 30 minutes, and then you haven't experienced technology. When I grew up, we had a lot of businesses, community businesses. We had a lot of individuals who gave back. We saw a huge divide as we were growing up through our teenage years, even in high school and college, where a lot of those businesses and a lot of communities were shuttered. And so as I, ventured off into, entrepreneurship after college and realizing that my career path that I wanted to select didn't select me, and I ended up being in entrepreneurship, I recognized there was a divide. There was a huge gulf of, opportunity where resources were not being, committed and relayed to individuals that needed a chance. And so as I began to help businesses on the private side, I began to see the need on the public side. And so nonprofits were some of the biggest organizations that, thought like nonprofits. They did not think like businesses. And because of that, they were leaving resources on the table and could not fulfill their mission, or they were struggling. And so trying to bring that mindset of having a business mindset to it, that was going to be the difference maker. And so that expertise and some filling that gap helped me work with a lot of organizations that way. I came from a generation of parents that didn't believe in, they were workers. They worked for people. My dad retired truck driver. My mother retired from retail in the banking system. And so when I started talking about entrepreneurship, it was like, what are you doing? You got a degree, go and get a job, et cetera. And so you definitely need to know who your support network is going to be when it comes to, helping you get started. And so although my parents are my first customers, per se, they are not, my favorite customers, because they still sometimes, 26 years later are questioning, why are you in business? And even though I've had 26 years now of ups and downs, ebbs and flows and success. And so you got to have that support network. You got to have, that group of folks who, and when I will say this, and I know this is not going to be popular, but sometimes the worst people to talk to first is your family, because they know you the best and they know who you are. They know all about you. And they may sometimes, if they don't quite see it the way you do, they may question that. And so I experienced that. In other situations, you may have those family members that do have the resources that can help you. They do have, the savings in the background. And we see a lot of success stories that way. And so you really have to know who those people are in your family and are they there to support. And so it wasn't my parents per se that were my biggest supporters financially that way, even though my family and my parents supported me. But it was my uncle. And so my uncle, he was an electrician for the railroad, but he also built properties. And so when I was in college, I used to go actually during break and actually go and help him build houses and do work on electrical projects and HVAC and things like that. And so, seeing him work in entrepreneurship, and when I started talking about entrepreneurship, he was not hesitant to say, here's some support, here's some, what are you doing and what are you trying to get done, et cetera. But I did have to have a plan. And so you have to have a plan, and you have to be able to articulate that plan to your family members, if it's going to be your family members, but if it's your friends, if it's going to be your colleagues, recognize where your support and resources are going to come from. Before you go to a bank, before you go to the Small Business Association, before you go to, a state like in Illinois, DCEO, or one of these type of entities, you need to know where your support is, who is willing to invest. There are other things out there like angel investors and things like that. You have to be clear about what they're buying into. They're not just giving you money. They're going to make an investment because they want to make money back. And so what is that going to look like for you? And so definitely make sure that you know who your supports are and who your resources are. There are a number of groups out there that solely come together. And this is something that we don't see as much as we used to. We used to have community groups that used to have investment clubs. Where they would basically be professionals that would put their money together and they would go buy stocks, bonds and invest in different type of project. And you don't see that as much anymore, but there are still a few out there. And so one of the things I benefited from was actually having one of those type of organizations invest in me when I was a new entrepreneur. And so you definitely want to do your research on who your real supports are, but you gotta have an idea and a plan that they can buy into and support. The biggest thing about entrepreneurship is not easy. A lot of people think that I got this great idea or I got this great product and I can just go out and put it in the universe and I'll make a lot of money. No, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of long days. And if you need other people. J. Paul Getty said, I'd rather have, 99 people helped me out than having 100% of my own effort. And so you do not want to be a solo act when it comes to a business and entrepreneurship. You need to have a support system, but also you have to make sure that you have a representative product that people see value in. A lot of times, what you like is not always what other people are like or gonna like, and so I've operated several businesses. I do consulting still, but I have had to transition my business model several times with the times. And so things, and even with COVID that just recently happened, going from being an in-person, sitting down, person-to-person meeting, spending a lot of time in an office place to now doing everything virtual. You have to constantly be willing to reinvent yourself to basically accommodate and communicate to your customer base. And so, really think about whether or not this is what you're passionate about, but also think about the days that you're not going to be paid. Think about the days that you're not going to have enough money to cover payroll. If it's your payroll and you have a family, you have to really think about that. One of the biggest challenges I had is when I was on my own, I didn't really think about those things. When I got married and had children, then wait a minute, I have to regroup and think about, okay, can I take this risk? And there were a lot of risks I couldn't take that I would take as an individual that I did with a family. And so because you can lose everything. And so, really think about where you want to be, what you're passionate about, and what your customers are going to really buy into, because all of those are major factors. And then most importantly, if you don't have resources, what are the resources that you can get accessible? And if you don't have them, if you can't get access to them, slowly build over time. Don't be in a rush, because, if you can do it without taking on a lot of debt, then you're ahead of the game. My goal when I started my entrepreneurship was to be in the black immediately. I did not want to take out loans. I didn't want to take out a lot of, investments and things like that that was going to put me behind the eight ball, so that when I did make money, I was constantly paying people back. And so, if you can at all possible avoid that, do it. So one thing that I would say to the younger generation and how you deal with conflict, and how you deal with what I call crucial conflict, is recognizing what's priority and what's not. We've had several examples that we've discussed in regards to, what is something that you really need to be up in arms about. And so, watching, politicians know that they are lying under oath to vilify a well qualified Supreme Court justice nominee just for, sound bites and political theater, is something you should be alarmed about. And therefore it should galvanize you to say, I can't have those type of people making laws for me. Therefore I should be getting ready to go and register as many people as possible to vote them out, no matter where they are, even if I'm in a different state. That's what you should be upset about. Will Smith slapping Chris Rock should not get priority, yet it dominated the news cycle more than what we saw with what happened with the Supreme Court justice nominee in the historical context. And so you need to prioritize. And I know media is going to try to bias you toward what's important. And I know that social media is a heavy influence, which is this generation right now. But to this generation, I'm saying to you is that you have to take a step back and say, this is not important. This is more important. And therefore, I need to activate my civic engagement so that I can be on the front lines of these things, so that it doesn't impact me down the road. And so it doesn't impact me with the type of laws that are being passed in some of these states across the country. When I only show up for a presidential election, but I don't show up for my state election. I don't show up for my local city elections. And then I don't understand why all of a sudden Roe versus Wade is being overturned, or I don't understand why all of a sudden, voting rights is being overturned. Well, it's because you didn't prioritize what was important. And, when you have a situation like a George Floyd, when you show up, you should not be surprised at a Kyle Rittenhouse on the opposite end, because of the fact of it's two different states, it's two different environments. And so if you're not sensitive of what's going on outside of your bubble. And what I always teach my participants and my clients is that you have to think outside the box. When you think inside of a box, you're limited. But when you think outside the box, you're open to any and everything and other influences, opinions, etc., other than your own. And therefore, you might learn something. And so definitely look at things outside of your purview. Don't just say, well, Ukraine is way overseas or whatever, because you have the same type of mentality that we experience in what's going on between a Russian dictator invading Ukraine. Wouldn't be soon after where we'll have a situation where someone's trying to basically take away your rights in, Illinois and in Chicago or in wherever you are. And so you definitely cannot ignore the things that are not important, that are important in for a TikTok video or for a Snapchat, or just so you can get more likes. So really prioritizing, what's important in life.
Coming up next on the Gen X Studio, we're on location at the Chosen Few Picnic, interviewing members of Generation X and capturing the festivities. If you'd like to donate or be a part of the Gen X project, contact us at GenXQUE, that's genxq.org.